They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you love most. Alpha Tāwhiri stood in the rain that night, watching the only woman he'd ever trusted being dragged toward the border of his territory, and he felt nothing. Nothing but the cold certainty that she deserved every moment of suffering that awaited her beyond his pack's protection. He'd given the order himself. Banishment. Exile. A sentence worse than death for any wolf. But here's what he didn't know, what none of them knew. As Aroha disappeared into the darkness that night, she was carrying the one secret that would bring the most powerful alpha in New Zealand to his knees. And by the time he learned the truth, it might already be too late. Stay with me because this story will shatter everything you think you know about loyalty, sacrifice, and the devastating price of jumping to conclusions. The Kapiti Coast Pack had stood for 7 generations, their territory stretching from the wild shores where the Tasman Sea crashed against ancient rocks, all the way to the mist-shrouded forests that older wolves whispered were haunted by the spirits of their ancestors. Tāwhiri had inherited the alpha position at 25 when his father fell in battle against rogues from the south, and in the 5 years since, he'd built a reputation that made even the boldest challengers think twice. Fair but fierce, protective but unforgiving, and absolutely, devastatingly loyal to his pack. Which is exactly why Aroha's betrayal cut so deep. She'd been his beta's younger sister, brought into the pack house after her parents died in a hunting accident when she was just 16. Quiet, observant, with eyes the color of native honey and a gentleness that seemed out of place in a world where strength meant everything. Most wolves dismissed her as weak. Tāwhiri saw something different. He saw intelligence, strategy, a mind that worked 3 steps ahead while everyone else was still processing step 1. By the time she turned 20, he'd made her his advisor. By 22, she was the wolf he trusted more than anyone in his inner circle. And by 24, she was the woman who haunted his dreams with an intensity that terrified him. Because alphas didn't fall in love. They chose strategic mates. They formed alliances. They certainly didn't lose their hearts to gentle-souled wolves who spent their free time in the pack library, studying healing herbs and old legends. But Tāwhiri had lost his heart anyway. He just never told her. The night everything fell apart started like any other council meeting. Autumn wind howling outside the packhouse windows, rain drumming steadily on the roof, and 15 of his most trusted wolves gathered around the ancient cowrie table that had witnessed countless decisions over the decades. They were discussing the growing threat from the Wairarapa pack to the east, an aggressive group led by an alpha named Rengi who'd been testing their borders for months. Aroha sat in her usual spot, taking notes, her pen moving steadily across the paper. She'd been quieter than usual lately, Tāwhiri had noticed. Distracted. Several times he'd caught her staring out windows with an expression he couldn't read, and twice she'd left council meetings early, claiming illness. He'd meant to ask her about it. He'd meant to do a lot of things. Then Kahu, his head of security, burst through the doors with evidence that stopped Tāwhiri's heart. Photographs, documents, communications with the Wairarapa pack that had been traced back to Aroha's personal accounts. Plans, strategies, detailed maps of their defenses. Everything an enemy would need to destroy them from within. The council chamber had erupted in fury. Wolves shouting for her immediate execution. Kahu's face twisted in rage and hurt. His own sister a traitor. But Tāwhiri had gone cold and still. His alpha power filling the room until everyone fell silent, their wolves instinctively bowing to his dominance. He'd looked at Aroha then, really looked at her, searching her face for some explanation, some sign that this was all a terrible mistake. She'd met his eyes with an expression that haunted him still, not fear, not guilt, but something that looked horrifyingly like resignation. Like she'd known this moment was coming and had already accepted it. Is it true? His voice had been barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of an alpha command. Did you betray us to the Wairarapa pack? She'd opened her mouth, and for one wild second, he'd thought she was going to deny it. Going to give him the explanation that would make sense of this nightmare. Instead, she'd closed her eyes and said 3 words that destroyed him. I did. Yes. The chamber exploded again. wolves calling for blood. Kahu lunging forward, only held back by two others as he screamed accusations at his sister. And Tāwhiri standing there, feeling something inside him shatter so completely he wondered if he'd ever be whole again. He'd sentenced her that night. Banishment. Exile beyond packlands with a warning sent to every allied pack within 500 miles. Aroha of Kapiti was declared traitor, and any wolf who offered her shelter would be considered an enemy. It was more mercy than most would have given. Execution was the traditional punishment for treason. But Tāwhiri couldn't give that order. Couldn't watch the life leave those honey-colored eyes, even as he felt his own heart dying in his chest. She'd been dragged out in the rain, given nothing but the clothes on her back and a 20-minute head start before they released wolves to escort her to the border. She hadn't fought, hadn't begged, hadn't even looked back as she disappeared into the storm. Tāwhiri had stood at the packhouse window, watching until he couldn't see her anymore, and then he'd turned back to his wolves and buried everything he felt behind the impenetrable wall that alphas were supposed to maintain. He had a pack to protect, a traitor to forget, a heart to ignore as it bled out somewhere behind his ribs. That was 3 months ago. In the weeks that followed, Tāwhiri threw himself into strengthening the pack's defenses. If Aroha had given the Wairarapa pack their secrets, they needed new ones. New patrol patterns, new safe houses, new everything. He worked 18-hour days, pushed his body until exhaustion was the only thing that let him sleep, and absolutely refused to think about honey-colored eyes or the gentleness he'd lost. The Wairarapa attacks they'd been bracing for never came. That should have been the first sign that something was wrong, but Tāwhiri was too buried in his own grief and rage to notice. He told himself Rengi was biding his time, planning something bigger. He never considered that maybe, just maybe, the attack had already been averted. Life continued. The pack rebuilt their sense of security. Kahu threw himself into his work with the same obsessive energy as Tāwhiri, both of them avoiding the ghost that haunted every corner of the packhouse. And slowly, painfully, things began to feel normal again. Then came the night that changed everything. Started with the pup. Marama, the 7-year-old daughter of one of his warriors, had always been special. Bright, brave, with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. She reminded Tāwhiri of what he was fighting to protect, the innocence and joy that pack life should provide. Her parents, Hemi and Anahara, were among his most loyal wolves. Marama had been sick for 2 days. What started as simple fatigue had progressed rapidly into something far more sinister. A fever. Seizures. A strange, spreading darkness beneath her skin that their pack doctor couldn't identify. By the 3rd day she was dying and no one could figure out why. Tāwhiri sat by her bedside that evening, holding the small hand of a pup who'd called him Uncle Alpha since she could speak, and felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. Hemi and Anahara were destroyed, clutching each other as they watched their daughter fade. The pack doctor, old Wiremu, had tried everything in his considerable knowledge and come up empty. "There's nothing more I can do," Wiremu had said, and those words hung in the air like a death sentence. "I don't understand this illness. It's like nothing I've ever seen." Marama had opened her eyes then, fever-bright and unfocused, and whispered something that made Tāwhiri's blood run cold. "The nice lady with the honey eyes said I should tell you about the purple flowers. She said you'd remember." Purple flowers. His mind flashed back to a conversation months before the banishment. Aroha showing him a pressed flower in one of her herb books. Her voice animated as she explained about rare poisonous plants and their antidotes. "This one's particularly nasty," she'd said. "Grows in the Eastern Territories. Causes progressive organ failure with a very distinctive presentation. But there's a counteragent if you know where to look. Wiremu." His voice came out harsh with sudden, terrible understanding. "Check her for nightshade derivative poisoning. Specifically, Wairarapa region variants." The old doctor had looked at him with confusion, then hope, then horror as he rushed to run tests. 2 hours later they had confirmation. Marama had been poisoned with a compound so rare and regionally specific that only someone with intimate knowledge of Eastern Territory plants would recognize it. And more importantly, someone had to have given her a partial antidote already, something that had slowed the poison's progression just enough to buy them time. She should have died yesterday based on these levels, Wiremu said quietly. Something's been keeping her alive. Something I didn't give her. The nice lady with honey eyes. Tāwhiri had stood there, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed suddenly slamming together with devastating clarity. He'd turned to Kahu, who'd been standing guard outside Marama's room, and saw his own realization reflected in his beta's face. "Find Aroha," Tāwhiri commanded. His alpha voice brooking no argument even as his hands shook. "Find her now. And bring her back alive." Tracking an exiled wolf should have been simple. They'd escorted her to the border. They'd made sure she left their territory. But Aroha had disappeared more completely than seemed possible for a lone wolf with no pack and no resources. Tāwhiri's trackers scoured the neutral territories for 3 days, while Marama clung to life through sheer force of will and whatever mysterious intervention she'd already received. They found signs of her eventually. A small camp near the Manawatu River, abandoned but recently used. Herb gatherings that matched her careful, systematic collection style. And notes. Dozens of notes written in her distinctive handwriting, detailing movements of Wairarapa pack scouts, patrol patterns, and shipments of unusual plants coming into their territory. She hadn't been sending information to their enemies. She'd been gathering intelligence on them. Tāwhiri read through the notes with growing horror and understanding. It was all there, laid out in Aroha's methodical documentation. How she'd discovered the Wairarapa pack wasn't just planning attacks. They were planning something far more insidious. Systematic poisoning of key pack members, starting with the vulnerable. Pups. Elderly. Weakening the pack from within before launching their assault. She'd found evidence. Proof. An entire conspiracy that would have destroyed them all. And she'd known that if she brought it to the council, there was a risk. A terrible calculated risk. That there was a mole within their inner circle. Someone who would warn Rengi that they'd been discovered. Someone who would accelerate the timeline and potentially kill dozens before they could be stopped. So she'd done the only thing she could think of. She'd made herself look like a traitor. She'd created false communications that would draw all suspicion to herself and away from the real investigation. She'd planned to be exiled, knowing she could work more effectively from outside the pack, gathering evidence without the mole knowing what she was really doing. What she apparently hadn't planned for was Rengi's backup plan, poisoning pups directly when the longer-term strategy was exposed. Or maybe she had planned for it, because somehow she'd been there when Marama needed her. Somehow she'd known. Alpha, one of his trackers, a young wolf named Tama, appeared at his shoulder. "We found a more recent camp. She's been moving every few days, staying ahead of us. But there's something else. Signs of a fight. Blood. And a trail leading deeper into the borderlands." Tāwhiri's wolf surged forward in panic he couldn't contain. "Show me." The fight site told a brutal story. Aroha's scent, fresh enough that she'd been there within the last day. And other scents. 3 male wolves, unfamiliar, probably rogues or mercenaries. Blood on the rocks. Disturbed earth. Signs of someone being dragged away. She'd been taken. Standing there, staring at evidence that Aroha was injured and captured, Tāwhiri felt the full weight of what he'd done crash down on him. He'd banished her. He'd declared her traitor and sent her out alone, stripped of pack protection, marked as untrustworthy to every wolf in the region. And she'd gone willingly, had accepted that sentence without defending herself, because she'd known it was the only way to protect them all. She'd been trying to save them from the beginning. And he'd destroyed her for it. "Find her," he commanded, his voice raw. "I don't care what it takes. We bring her home." They tracked the rogues for 2 days, moving fast and hard through territories that got progressively more dangerous the further they went. These weren't lands governed by pack law and alpha justice. This was the wilderness where wolves who'd rejected or been rejected by civilized pack life made their own brutal rules. Tāwhiri pushed his wolves harder than he'd ever pushed them, driven by a fear that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the woman he'd failed so catastrophically. Every hour they didn't find her was another hour she was suffering for his mistakes. Another hour she was paying the price for his blindness. They found the rogue camp on the evening of the second day. Hidden in a ravine where 3 rivers met. Crude shelters, fire pit, and at the center, tied to a post with silver-laced chains that would burn any shifter who struggled, was Aroha. She was barely conscious, her face bruised, one arm hanging at a wrong angle. The clothes she'd been exiled in were torn and blood-stained. But when she lifted her head and saw him standing at the edge of the camp with 20 of his strongest wolves, her eyes cleared for just a moment, and her first words weren't about herself. "Marama," she whispered, her voice cracked and desperate. Did the pup survive? Something in Tāwhiri's chest broke open completely. Here she was, captured and tortured by rogues in lawless territory, and her first concern was still for his pack. For a pup she'd risked everything to save. "She's alive," he called back, his voice carrying across the camp. "Because of you." The 3 rogues had emerged then, sizing up the newcomers with the stupid confidence of wolves who'd lived outside pack law too long to remember what real power looked like. Their leader, a scarred male who reeked of violence, stepped forward. "That's my prisoner," he growled. "Caught her on neutral land. By rogue rights, she's mine to ransom or kill." "By alpha rights," Tāwhiri said softly, letting his power unfurl like a living thing, "she's mine. And you're standing on borrowed time." What happened next was swift and brutal. Tāwhiri's wolves were trained warriors, disciplined and coordinated. The rogues were savage but chaotic. It was over in minutes, the 3 males subdued and bound, their crude camp destroyed. And Tāwhiri was kneeling beside Aroha, carefully breaking the silver chains with hands that shook despite his best efforts to stay steady. "Why?" he asked as he worked, the question encompassing everything. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you defend yourself? Why did you let me?" His voice broke. "Why did you let me banish you?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might have lost consciousness. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "Because there was a mole in the council. I didn't know who. And if I'd accused someone without proof, the real traitor would have warned Rengi, and they would have accelerated everything. The poisonings, the attacks. I couldn't risk it. The pack had to be safe. So you sacrificed yourself." "I sacrificed my place in the pack," she corrected weakly. "But I never stopped protecting it. That was never. I could never betray you, Tāwhiri. Never betray them. Even if it meant you hated me." The chains fell away, and he gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries. She made a small sound of pain but didn't protest, and he felt her weight settle against him with a trust he absolutely didn't deserve. "I never hated you," he said against her hair. "I've never been capable of hating you. But Aroha, you have to know." He stopped, struggling with words that shouldn't be this hard. "You have to know what you are to me. What you've always been. Your advisor," she murmured, already drifting. "Your friend, maybe. Once." "My heart," he corrected, feeling the truth of it resonate through his entire being. "You're my heart. And I banished you. I sent away the most precious thing in my world because I was too blind and too proud to question what seemed obvious. Sorry. God, Aroha, I'm so sorry." He thought she'd fallen unconscious then, her breathing evening out, her body going slack. But as he stood, lifting her easily, she whispered something that barely qualified as sound. "I'd do it again. Always. For you. For the pack." Tāwhiri carried her out of that ravine personally, refusing to let anyone else take her weight, and started the journey home. His pack could handle the rogues. His wolves could finish securing the area. But Aroha, his Aroha, was going back to Kapiti territory where she belonged, and he was never letting her go again. The journey back took 3 days of careful travel, with Aroha drifting in and out of consciousness and Tāwhiri barely sleeping, too afraid to take his eyes off her. Wiremu had come to meet them halfway with supplies and medicine, and he'd worked steadily to stabilize her injuries while they moved. Broken arm, cracked ribs, severe dehydration and exhaustion, silver burns from the chains. But nothing fatal, nothing permanent. She would heal. The question was whether they could heal what he'd broken between them. They arrived at the pack house in the early morning, dawn just breaking over the eastern hills. Word had spread fast. Their exiled packmate was returning, vindicated and injured, and nearly the entire pack had gathered to witness it. Tāwhiri saw guilt on many faces, shame on others. These were good wolves who'd been too quick to believe the worst, who'd called for blood without asking questions. But the moment that mattered most came when Marama broke free from her parents and ran forward. The pup was still weak, still recovering, but alive and bright-eyed and wholly herself. She'd stopped at the bottom of the steps, staring up at Aroha in Tāwhiri's arms, and her little face had crumpled. "You saved me," she whispered. "The bad wolves said they were gonna hurt me, but you gave me medicine and told me to be brave." Aroha had opened her eyes, focusing on the pup with visible effort. "You were so brave, little one. The bravest wolf I've ever met. Are you gonna be okay now? Is the Alpha gonna keep you safe like you kept me safe?" "I promise you," Tāwhiri said, his voice carrying to the entire gathered pack, "that Aroha will never be unsafe again. She will never be unprotected. She will never be anything less than honored in this pack for as long as I'm Alpha. And anyone who thinks otherwise can challenge me for the position right now." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then Kahu stepped forward, his face twisted with emotion. "I owe my sister the greatest apology," he said, his voice rough. "I called for her death. I believed the worst without question. And she was protecting us all along." He dropped to one knee, a gesture of profound submission. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm asking anyway." Others followed, one by one, wolves kneeling in acknowledgement of their mistake, in apology to someone who'd given up everything to keep them safe. Tāwhiri watched Aroha's face as she took it in, saw tears tracking down her bruised cheeks, and felt his own eyes burning. But there was still one more truth that needed to come out. One more piece of the puzzle. "There's something else you all need to know," Tāwhiri announced. "The evidence that convicted Aroha came from someone in our inner circle. Someone who had access to our systems and communications. Someone who knew exactly what to fabricate to make her look guilty." He paused, letting that sink in. "We have a traitor among us. A real one." The investigation that followed was exhaustive and brutal. It took 2 weeks of careful work, cross-referencing Aroha's notes with internal communications, tracking down inconsistencies and lies. And in the end, the truth was devastating in its simplicity. Roimita, one of their junior council members. A wolf they'd all trusted. She'd been feeding information to the Wairarapa pack for over a year, motivated by nothing more complex than promised power and position in Rengi's pack after the invasion. She'd been the one to plant the false evidence against Aroha when she'd realized Aroha was getting too close to the truth. She'd been the one to facilitate the poisoning attempts. And she'd done it all with such casual disregard for the lives she was destroying that it made Tāwhiri physically ill. Her sentence was execution, swift and final. And this time when pack justice was served, it was on someone who actually deserved it. Aroha recovered slowly. Her body healed faster than her spirit, and Tāwhiri understood why. She'd been betrayed by her pack, exiled by her alpha, forced to survive alone in a world that considered her enemy. Those wounds went deeper than broken bones. He gave her space when she needed it, and presence when she'd allow it. He sat with her in the library where she'd always felt safest, reading reports while she stared out windows at the territory she'd fought so hard to protect. He brought her meals when she forgot to eat, and stood guard outside her door at night when the nightmares made her cry out. And slowly, day by day, he watched her come back to herself. It was a month before she sought him out intentionally. He was in his office, buried in correspondence with allied packs, when she knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. She looked better, The bruises had faded, her arm had healed, and she'd gained back the weight she'd lost in exile. But there was something different in the way she held herself. Harder, more cautious. "I've been thinking," she said, standing by the window rather than sitting, "about what happens next. For me." His heart clenched. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I understand why you did what you did. The evidence against me was compelling. You protected the pack like an alpha should. But Tāwhiri," she finally looked at him, and her eyes were older than they'd been before. "I also understand that trust, once broken, doesn't just magically repair itself. And you broke mine when you didn't even ask for my side of the story before condemning me." The words landed like physical blows, but he didn't flinch away from them. He deserved every cut. "You're right," he said simply. "I failed you. I failed you as your alpha, as your friend, and as—" He stopped, struggling. "As someone who loved you more than his own life and was too afraid to admit it until he'd already lost you." She went very still. Don't what? Don't say things like that now. Not when I'm trying to figure out if I can stay here. If I can rebuild a life in a place where people watched me get dragged away and didn't question it, then I'll say it differently." He stood, moving around the desk but keeping distance between them, respecting her space. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Aroha. I'm not even asking for a second chance, because I don't know if I deserve one. But I am telling you truth. I've loved you since you were 20 years old and challenged me in a council meeting about resource allocation. I've loved you through every conversation, every quiet moment, every time you made me think differently about something I thought I understood. And I loved you even when I thought you'd betrayed me, which is how I know the feeling is never going to go away. You banished someone you loved. I banished someone I thought had destroyed everything I was sworn to protect. And I was wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. But Aroha, here's what I learned during the worst 3 months of my life. Loving someone and trusting someone aren't always the same thing. I never stopped loving you. Not for one single moment. What I stopped doing was trusting my own instincts, because the evidence seemed so clear and I was terrified of being the alpha who let emotion cloud his judgment. I was terrified of being weak. And now I know that real weakness is letting fear make your decisions. Real weakness is choosing evidence over the person you know in your soul. Failed that test. Failed you. But I'm asking, begging, for the chance to spend the rest of my life making it right. To be the alpha, the friend, and the man you deserved all along. The silence stretched between them, fragile and weighted with possibility. Then Aroha spoke, her voice very soft. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the exile. Not the danger or the hunger or even the rogues. The worst part was looking at your face that night and seeing nothing. No doubt. No hesitation. Just certainty that I was guilty. I'd spent years proving myself to this pack, and it all disappeared in a moment. I know. And I can't undo that. But I can tell you that I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you matter. That your trust matters. That you're seen and valued and absolutely essential to this pack and to me." Pretty words, Alpha. Then let me prove them with actions. Not because I'm ordering it, but because you want to. Because this is your home and your pack and your territory that you bled for. Let me show you day by day that you were always meant to be here. And if, after all that, you decide you can't forgive what happened, I'll accept it. But please, Aroha, let me try. She was quiet for a long moment, her honey-colored eyes searching his face for something he desperately hoped she'd find. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "You really love me? Even after everything? I love you more than anything in this world. More than territory or power or pack. You are the one thing I can't survive losing again." "That's terrifying." "It is," he agreed. "But it's also truth." Another silence. Then she crossed the space between them, moving slowly like she was testing the ground with each step. When she was close enough to touch, she reached out and placed one hand against his chest, right over his frantically beating heart. "I need time," she said, "to remember how to trust. To heal what got broken. You can have all the time in the world. And I need you to understand that I'm not the same wolf I was. What happened changed me. Made me harder, maybe. More careful. I know. And I'll love every version of you, always. You might not like the changes. Try me. She smiled then, small and tentative but real. You're very persistent for someone who knows he messed up. That's because I know what I'm fighting for. And Aroha. I've never lost a fight that mattered. There's always a first time. Not this time. He covered her hand with his own, holding it against his heart. Never this time. The next months were a study in patience and persistence. Tāwhiri meant every word he'd said about proving himself, and he approached the task with the same strategic focus he brought to everything else. But this wasn't about grand gestures or public declarations. This was about showing up day after day, in the small moments that rebuilt trust brick by painful brick. He started including her in council meetings again, but this time he made a point of asking her opinion directly and supporting her publicly when others questioned her. He created new protocols requiring concrete evidence and personal testimony before any pack member could be accused of crimes. He established a review board, chaired by Aroha herself, to investigate grievances and ensure fairness. Most importantly, he listened. When she had nightmares about the exile, he sat with her until dawn, talking or silent as she needed. When she flinched away from touch that came too suddenly, he learned to announce his presence before approaching. When she questioned decisions or pushed back on plans, he welcomed it instead of seeing it as challenge. And slowly, he watched her begin to believe that she truly was safe again. The turning point came unexpectedly, for months after her return. They were on a border patrol together, something they'd done dozens of times in the old days. The afternoon was clear and cold, autumn giving way to winter, and they'd stopped by the river to rest the wolves with them. Aroha had been quiet all day, that distant look in her eyes that meant she was working through something internal. Tāwhiri had learned to wait out these moods, to give her space to process without pressure. But this time, as they stood watching the water flow past, she spoke. I forgive you. The words were so soft he thought he'd imagined them. What? I forgive you, she repeated louder now. For the banishment. For not questioning the evidence. For all of it. I've been holding on to the anger because it felt safer than letting it go. But Tāwhiri, I'm tired. I'm tired of being angry at someone who spent 4 months proving he's sorry. I'm tired of protecting myself from someone who's done nothing but try to keep me safe. She turned to face him fully. You made a terrible mistake. But you've owned it. You've changed because of it. And I choose to believe, that you'd never make it again. He couldn't speak. The relief flooding through him was so intense it felt like drowning in the best possible way. That doesn't mean I've forgotten, she continued. And it doesn't mean the scar isn't still there. But I'm choosing to trust you anyway. To believe that we can build something stronger from the broken pieces. If you still want that. If I still. He laughed, the sound slightly unhinged. Aroha, there hasn't been a moment in the last 7 months where I've wanted anything else. But I need you to be sure. I need you to know that if you give me your trust again, I will guard it with everything I am. I will question my own certainty before I ever doubt you. I will. I know, she interrupted gently. I know what you'll do. That's why I'm choosing this. She reached up, placing both hands on either side of his face. So here's what happens now. We move forward. We build something new. We don't forget what happened, but we don't let it define us either. And Tāwhiri, we do it together. Together, he echoed, feeling like the word was a vow. Promise. A future unfurling before them. Also, she said, a hint of mischief creeping into her voice for the first time in months. You should probably kiss me now, because I've been waiting for you to make a move for approximately 4 years, and I'm getting impatient. 4 years. I'm very patient. But not infinite. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent and filled with everything he'd been holding back for so long. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his jacket, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, She was smiling in a way that made his heart stutter. "Much better," she murmured. "We should have done that ages ago. We have time to make up for it. We have a lifetime." The formal ceremony reinstating Aroha's position in the pack happened on the winter solstice, a deliberate choice that marked endings and new beginnings. The entire pack gathered under the ancient trees at the heart of their territory, the same place where generations of wolves had witnessed important pack moments. But Tāwhiri had planned something more than just reinstatement. He'd spent weeks working with the council, with Kahu, with the elder wolves who remembered pack traditions that went back centuries. Because Aroha deserved more than just acceptance back into the pack. She deserved recognition for what she'd sacrificed. When she stood before him, dressed in traditional ceremonial clothing that marked important pack occasions, he saw a woman who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Different from who she'd been, yes, but remarkable in ways he was still discovering. "Aroha of Kapiti," he said formally, his voice carrying to every wolf present. "You were accused of treason. You were exiled. You lost your place among us and suffered greatly for crimes you didn't commit. But more than that, you suffered for crimes that were actually acts of incredible bravery and self-sacrifice. You put yourself at risk to protect this pack. You accepted exile rather than endanger us. You saved lives from the shadows while we condemned you in the light." He paused, making sure every wolf was listening, that they understood the weight of what came next. "There are no words adequate to apologize for what was done to you. No ceremony grand enough to honor what you did for us. But I stand before you now, as your alpha and as someone who loves you more than his own life, to offer what acknowledgement I can. You are not just welcomed back. You are celebrated. You are not just forgiven for crimes you didn't commit. You are recognized as the hero you've always been." He turned to Kahu, who stepped forward carrying a carved wooden box, ancient and precious. Inside lay something that hadn't been awarded in 3 generations, the heart of the pack, a pendant carved from Panamu greenstone that was given only to wolves who'd demonstrated exceptional sacrifice for the good of all. "This belonged to my great-grandmother," Tāwhiri continued, lifting the pendant carefully. "She wore it after she saved the pack during the Great Sickness of 1891. Staying behind to care for the infected when everyone else fled. It's been waiting for someone worthy of its legacy. Aroha, you are more than worthy." He placed the pendant around her neck, the greenstone settling against her heart. The pack erupted in howls of approval, of celebration, of wolves acknowledging what should have been obvious from the start. And Aroha stood there with tears streaming down her face, finally receiving the recognition she'd never asked for but absolutely deserved. But Tāwhiri wasn't finished. When the howls died down, he spoke again. "There's one more thing. Aroha, you've been my advisor, my friend, and the wolf who holds my heart. But if you're willing, if you'll have me after everything, I'd like you to be something more." He dropped to one knee before her, before the entire pack, and felt the rightness of the gesture down to his bones. "Be my mate. Be my partner in leading this pack. Be the voice of wisdom when I rush toward action, and the courage that steadies me when I doubt. Not because the pack needs it but because I need you. 'Cause I choose you. Because there is no version of my future that doesn't have you at the center of it." The silence that fell was different this time. Anticipatory, hopeful, everyone waiting for her answer. Aroha looked down at him, and he saw everything flash across her face. The pain of the past. The hope for the future. The love she'd hidden for so long. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes to being your mate. Yes to leading beside you. Yes to building something beautiful from the ashes of what broke. But Tāwhiri, you should know, I'm going to challenge you constantly. I'm going to question your decisions and push back when I think you're wrong. I'm going to be exactly as stubborn and opinionated as I've always been, maybe more so. I wouldn't want you any other way. And I'm going to hold you to every promise you made. Every word about trust and partnership and treating me as an equal. I'm counting on it. Also, you're going to have to work on your communication skills, because the whole silent alpha brooding thing only works until it leads to catastrophic misunderstandings." He laughed, standing and pulling her close. I'll work on it every day for the rest of our lives. Good enough. She kissed him then, in front of the entire pack, and the howls that rose up were joyous and deafening. When they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, I love you. I've loved you for years. And I'm choosing to believe we can make this work. We will make this work, he promised. Because you're the strongest wolf I've ever known, and I'm done underestimating you. The mating ceremony happened a week later, a private affair with just close family and friends. Kahu stood as Aroha's witness, his own redemption arc still in progress as he worked to rebuild his relationship with his sister. Hemi and Anahara were there with Marama, who'd appointed herself Aroha's special guardian and took the role seriously. And old Wiremu performed the ceremony with traditional words that bound two wolves together for life. When it was done, when they were officially mated in the eyes of the pack and the ancestors, Tāwhiri took Aroha's hand and led her to the highest point on their territory. They stood together looking out over the land she'd protected at such cost, and he felt something settle into place that he hadn't even known was missing. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. The choice you made. Becoming the villain so you could be the hero. Every day, she admitted. And never. Cost me everything and nearly broke me. But it saved the pack. It saved Marama and probably dozens of others. So no, I don't regret it. I just wish there'd been another way. I wish I'd given you one. I wish I'd been the alpha who trusted his instincts about you over evidence that seemed damning. You're that alpha now. You learned, changed, became better because of what happened, as terrible as it was. She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. That's all we can do really. Learn from our mistakes and choose to be better going forward. Wise words, my mate. Well, someone has to bring wisdom to this relationship. Your contribution appears to be stubborn determination and impressive displays of alpha dominance. Don't forget my rugged good looks. She laughed, the sound light and free in a way he'd missed desperately. How could I forget those? They stood there as the sun set over their territory, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Below them, the pack house glowed with warm light, their pack safe and whole, their home protected, their future stretching out with possibility. Tell me something, Aroha said eventually. When you thought I'd betrayed you, in that moment before you gave the order, what were you feeling? Really? It was a hard question, but she deserved the honest answer. Destroyed. Like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out everything vital. I kept thinking that if you could betray me, if someone I trusted that completely could be that false, then I didn't understand anything about the world. It was worse than anger. It was devastation. And now I understand that trust isn't about being certain someone will never hurt you. It's about choosing to believe in them even when you're afraid. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable with someone who could destroy you, and trusting they won't. That's very profound for an alpha who claims to be all brooding and dominance. I have layers. You do, she agreed softly. And I'm looking forward to discovering all of them. Spring came to the Kapiti coast with an explosion of life and color. The forests burst into bloom, the rivers ran high with snowmelt, and the pack settled into a new rhythm that felt stronger than what had come before. Stronger because it had been tested and rebuilt. Stronger because they'd learned hard lessons about jumping to conclusions and the importance of asking questions. Aroha had transformed the council structure, implementing checks and balances that made it almost impossible for another wolf to be condemned without thorough investigation. She'd also started training programs for younger wolves, teaching them about critical thinking and the dangers of groupthink. Marama was her star pupil, the pup who'd survived showing remarkable wisdom for her years. Tāwhiri had learned to delegate more, to trust his mate's judgment, and to communicate rather than brood. It wasn't always easy. Old habits died hard, but he worked at it with the same determination he brought to everything else. And Aroha called him on it when he slipped, which he'd specifically asked her to do. They were in the library one evening, reviewing reports together, when Aroha suddenly went very still. Tāwhiri looked up from his paperwork to find her staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air for a moment while his brain processed them. Then he was around the desk and pulling her into his arms, careful even in his excitement. "You're sure?" Wiremu confirmed it this afternoon. "About 6 weeks along." She pulled back to look at him. "Are you happy? I know we haven't really talked about pups yet, and the timing might not be ideal with everything that's happened." "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he interrupted. "Aroha, you're giving me everything. You've already given me everything. This is just..." He couldn't find adequate words, so he kissed her instead, pouring everything he felt into the contact. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "So we're doing this. Bringing a pup into this pack. We're doing this. And that pup is going to have the strongest, wisest, most remarkable mother in the history of our people. And a father who's learned that asking questions is sometimes more important than having answers. I'm still learning that one." "I know. But you're trying. That's what matters." They stood there in the library where so much of their story had unfolded, holding each other and contemplating the future they were building together. A future that included not just them but the next generation. A pup who would grow up hearing the story of how their mother saved the pack, and how their father learned that real strength sometimes meant admitting you were wrong. "Can I tell you something?" Aroha asked quietly. "Anything. When I was out there in exile, cold and alone and terrified, I used to imagine moments like this. Moments where I was home and safe and surrounded by love. I told myself that if I could just survive, if I could just protect the pack and expose the real traitor, maybe someday I'd get to feel what it was like to truly belong again. And this..." She gestured to the space between them, to the library, to everything. "This is better than anything I imagined. Worth every terrible moment it took to get here. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling guilty about those terrible moments." "You don't have to stop feeling guilty. You just have to remember that guilt is useful if it changes you. You're not the same Alpha who banished me. You've grown. And our pup is going to have a father who understands the weight of his decisions and the importance of mercy. Our pup is going to have parents who love them fiercely and a pack that will protect them with everything we have." "Yes," she agreed. "They are." The news of Aroha's pregnancy spread through the pack like wildfire, and the celebration was immediate and joyous. For many wolves, it represented a final healing of the wounds that had been inflicted months before. The alpha and his mate, moving forward together, creating new life. It was symbolic in ways that mattered deeply to pack structure and morale. But there was one moment that captured the true significance of how far they'd come. It happened 3 weeks after the announcement, during a pack gathering. Marama, now 8 and thriving, had been following Aroha around like a shadow all evening. Finally, as the adults talked and laughed around the bonfire, the pup tugged on Aroha's sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" Marama whispered. "Always, little one. When you have your pup, are you going to teach them about the purple flowers? About medicines and helping people?" Aroha knelt down to the pup's level, smiling. "I think so." "Why?" "Because when I grow up I want to learn all that stuff too. I want to be like you. Someone who saves people even when it's scary. Even when nobody knows you're being brave." The words hit Aroha visibly, tears springing to her eyes. Tāwhiri, who'd been standing nearby, moved closer and placed a hand on his mate's shoulder in support. "That's a beautiful dream," Aroha managed. "And I would be honored to teach you everything I know." "Really? Even though I'm just a pup?" "Especially because you're a pup. Young wolves who want to help others, those are the wolves who make packs stronger. Who make the world better." Marama beamed, then threw her arms around Aroha in an enthusiastic hug before running back to her parents. Tāwhiri helped Aroha stand, and she leaned into him, wiping her eyes. "She's going to be remarkable," Aroha said softly. "Like her hero," Tāwhiri replied. "The wolf who saved her life and never asked for recognition. The wolf who teaches all of us what real courage looks like. I just did what needed to be done. That's what heroes always say." He turned her to face him, serious now. Aroha, do you understand what you've become to this pack? Not just to me but to all of them. You're the standard, the example, the wolf that pups like Marama look up to and want to emulate. Your story, our story, is going to be told for generations. The mate who sacrificed everything, and the alpha who learned to see past his own certainty. That's a lot of pressure. You've handled worse. Much worse. He touched her face gently. And you won't handle it alone. Whatever comes next, raising our pup, leading this pack, dealing with whatever challenges the future brings, we do it together. Always together. Promise. I promise. On my life, on my honor as Alpha, on everything I am. I will never make you face the darkness alone again. You have my word. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and around them the pack continued their celebration, unaware of the quiet moment happening at the edge of the firelight. But that was fine. Some moments weren't meant to be witnessed. Some promises were just between two wolves who'd found each other, lost each other, and fought their way back to something stronger than before. The pup came in early spring, a daughter with her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's strong spirit. They named her Atawa, meaning beautiful in Tirio Maori, because she was exactly that. Beautiful and perfect, and the embodiment of everything they'd fought for. Tāwhiri sat in the nursery late one night, holding his sleeping daughter and watching Aroha rest after the long labor. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the betrayal that wasn't, the banishment that should never have happened, the long road back to trust. And he thought about how close he'd come to losing everything because he'd been too certain, too quick to believe the worst. You're brooding again, Aroha murmured without opening her eyes. Just thinking. About how I almost destroyed us because I was too afraid to question what seemed obvious. About how lucky I am that you're brave enough to give second chances. It's not just luck. It's work. Every day we both choose this. Choose each other. Choose to be better than our mistakes. I'm going to teach her that, he said, looking down at Atawa. I'm going to teach our daughter that real strength is admitting when you're wrong. That leadership means asking questions, not just making pronouncements. That the people you love deserve your trust and your doubt before they deserve your judgment. We'll teach her together, Aroha corrected, finally opening her eyes to smile at him. All of that and more. We'll teach her about sacrifice and courage. About standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. About how broken things can be rebuilt into something stronger. She's going to have the best mother in the world. And a father who learned how to admit his mistakes and grow from them. That's pretty remarkable too. Atawa stirred in his arms, making a small sound before settling again. Tāwhiri stood carefully and placed her in the carved wooden cradle that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that. 7 generations of Kapiti Coast alphas had slept in that cradle. Now his daughter, his and Aroha's, continued the tradition. Do you ever think about that night? He asked quietly, rejoining Aroha on the bed. The night I banished you. Sometimes. Less than I used to. I think about it all the time. About the look on your face when you accepted the sentence without fighting. I understand now, you were protecting the pack even then. But Aroha, that look haunts me. The resignation. Like you'd accepted that I'd never see your side. Because I had accepted it. In that moment, with the evidence against me and a potential mole in the council, I knew there was no defense I could offer that wouldn't risk everything. So I accepted the role I had to play. You're the strongest wolf I've ever known. I'm a wolf who did what needed to be done. Just like you're an alpha who learned from his mistakes and became better for it. We're both just doing our best, Tāwhiri. That's all anyone can do. He pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent, herbs and rain and home. Our best is pretty damn good when we do it together. It is, she agreed, settling against him. And it's only going to get better. Outside, the Kapiti Coast pack slept peacefully under the protection of their alpha and his mate. The territory was secure. Pack was strong. And in the nursery of the pack house, The next generation dreamed dreams of a future built on lessons learned and mistakes that had become wisdom. Tāwhiri held his mate close and his daughter safe, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: complete peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because he'd learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Growth was. Change was. Becoming better than you were yesterday, and trusting the people you loved to do the same. "I love you," he whispered into Aroha's hair. "I know," she murmured back, already half asleep. "I've always known. Even when you were being an idiot about it." He smiled in the darkness because that was so perfectly Aroha. Honest even in tenderness, never softening truth to make it more palatable. It was one of 10,000 things he loved about her. And as sleep claimed him, surrounded by the two most important wolves in his world, Alpha Tāwhiri of the Kapiti Coast Pack understood something fundamental. The greatest strength wasn't in being right. It was in recognizing when you were wrong and having the courage to make it right. In trusting your heart even when your head said otherwise. In believing that broken things could heal stronger than they'd been before. His mate had taught him that. His beautiful, brilliant, unbreakably strong mate who'd accepted banishment to save them all and never asked for recognition. She'd taught him about real courage. About real love. About what it meant to be a leader who served rather than just commanded. And he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of those lessons. Because that's what love required. Not perfection. Not certainty. Just the willingness to keep trying, keep growing, keep choosing each other even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That was the real story. Not about betrayal and banishment, but about how two wolves found their way back to each other through honesty, forgiveness, and the kind of love that refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. It was a story worth telling. A story worth living. And it was only the beginning. So remember this. The people you love deserve your questions before your judgment. They deserve your trust before your suspicion. And when you make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, they deserve your humility and your willingness to make it right. Alpha Tāwhiri learned that lesson the hard way, nearly losing everything before he understood what he had. But he learned it. He changed. He became the wolf his mate deserved and the alpha his pack needed. And in the end, that's what matters most. Not that we never mess up, but that we own our mistakes and grow from them. That we choose love over pride, understanding over certainty, and second chances over closed doors. Because sometimes the person you banish is the person who was saving you all along. And sometimes the greatest act of leadership is admitting you were wrong and fighting to make it right. What will you choose? If this story moved you, if it made you think about trust and forgiveness and the people in your life who deserve better from you, I want you to do something for me. Don't just scroll past. Take a moment right now and hit that like button. Let me know this resonated with you. Drop a comment and tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because we're all in this together, navigating relationships and mistakes and the hard work of becoming better humans. And if you want more stories that dig deep into the messy, beautiful reality of love and redemption, subscribe to this channel. I promise you won't regret it. Your support means everything. Every like, every comment, every subscription tells me that these stories matter to you as much as they matter to me. So take that small action right now. Be part of this community. And let's keep exploring these powerful themes together. Now go hug someone you love and